Hiroyuki Sawano is one of the biggest names in the anime space. The acclaimed composer has been around since 2004, composing for well over 100 projects at this point. Sawano's incredibly unique and distinguishable style is something that easily enthralls any listener. He's best known for putting together this beautiful dynamic orchestra with all kinds of emotion and intensity. Sawano has used all sorts of different elements, especially Japanese ones, with all kinds of genres, spanning electronic, rock, and flat-out J-pop. Some of Sawano's most beloved projects include Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, Guilty Crown, Attack on Titan, Kill la Kill, Promare, 86, and of course, Xenoblade Chronicles X. With the release of Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition just around the corner later this month, I think there's never been a better time to revisit Hiroyuki Sawano's contributions to the Xenoblade Chronicles series, especially since it has been confirmed that the acclaimed composer will return to compose new music for Definitive Edition. With that being said, welcome to episode 8 of Beyond the Conduit, and let's dive right into exploring the wonderful music of Hiroyuki Sawano. Before we delve into Sawano's contributions to Xenoblade, I'd like to take a step back and explore his influences and how he came into the world of composing for those who are unfamiliar with his career. Born in 1980, Hiroyuki Sawano is a native of Tokyo, Japan, and he first became interested in the world of music at a young age as he played piano as a child and heard the music of Asuka, a Japanese singer. As he grew up, Sawano ended up studying things like composition and orchestration under a music teacher, and at the very end of his high school career, he decided to work on soundtrack music. This led to him attending a school specifically focused on composition. This is around the time that Sawano began to become immersed in the music of various composers such as Joe Hisaishi, Ryuichi Sakamoto, Yoko Kanno, Hans Zimmer, and Danny Elfman. These are just a few of the many different influences you'll find throughout Sawano's work. While his compositional work first began in 2006, it wasn't until Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn in 2010 where he really began to work on a major series. Of course, if you've followed Sawano throughout his career, you'll know that this was really the project that pushed him out into the world with more opportunities. Just a year later, in 2011, Sawano worked with Aniplex on Blue Exorcist and also composed the soundtrack for Guilty Crown. The big moment, in my opinion, for his career was really that Attack on Titan soundtrack in 2013, working with Wit Studio. His very unique compositional style really shines in that show, and, in my opinion at least, helps elevate it to the heights that it reaches. Ever since Attack on Titan, Sawano has appeared and participated in so many different projects it's honestly kinda hard to count. He actually launched an entirely new project under the name Sawano Hiroyuki NZK. This project has seen him release all sorts of different vocal songs with some of the biggest artists in Japan. If you've watched basically any Aniplex anime in the last 10 years, you've probably heard Sawano create an opening or an ending through this project. For a good portion of his career, Sawano composed entire soundtracks for various anime seasons, among other things. However, as of the last 5 years or so, Sawano generally looks to split composing a soundtrack, most likely to allow himself more time to work on more projects. A great example of this is the 16 various albums he has composed alongside Kota Yamamoto since 2017. This was across some highly praised works such as 86 and Attack on Titan: The Final Season. So, enough about Sawano's background. What makes his music special? Why is he such a beloved composer? The answer to that question solely lies in the fact that there is nothing like his music. Sawano's style doesn't even really have a genre. It bounces here, there, and everywhere, and it's always just perfectly melded to the project he's working on. As I mentioned earlier in the opening of this video, he loves to use just beautiful, triumphant orchestration to really build up scenes, but at the same time, you might turn around and see him using a crazy electronic anthem or something else entirely. That's not to say that Sawano's music is unpredictable either. In fact, I feel like it's super easy to realize what music is Sawano's just because everything has a similar sense of flow. But even then, it's so different. Sawano does numerous things differently than any other composer out there. And I think that differentiation works wonders on keeping his soundtracks fresh, even if they might sound similar and use similar chord progression. He has a very, very heavy use of vocals in all sorts of pieces you would never expect. You'll hear all kinds of different languages as well, such as English, German, and of course Japanese. I personally think of tracks like Inferno, Before My Body Is Dry, Perfect Time, Bios, Barricades, and Call Your Name as some of the best that Sawano has composed. This lyricism alone is something that really elevates his music, making everything more emotional in the anime and various other projects. I think about Attack on Titan especially, and just how many vocal tracks there are on that soundtrack, and really just think about how many scenes were elevated because of that. It's genuinely incredible to think about just how many scenes like this there are in all of the dozens of shows he's worked on, especially considering he usually writes this music before any animation is available. I mentioned that Sawano works with all kinds of different vocalists, and within his fandom there's many jokes of him having his harem of vocalists here and there. But really, take a step back and look at the vocalists he works with on the regular. These are people like MPI, Aimer, Mizuki, Yosh, and many, many more. Very, very few composers have access to such rich talent in the market, but it's never been a problem for Sawano. And there are many instances of him seeking out young talent through his NZK project to create beautiful new pieces. Naturally, his composing skills are of course not limited to those tracks with vocalists. Much of his traditional soundtrack work is of course incredible, just building up and creating unbeatable emotional moments. If you can't tell, Hiroyuki Sawano is one of my favorite composers ever, and I don't think I'm ever going to have enough of his music. So I'm gonna cut myself off there for the anime stuff because this could become a 1-hour video of me talking about all of his work over the years, and we know that's not what this video is about. Beyond anime, Sawano composed for a few games, with one in particular being an extremely impressive soundtrack, Xenoblade Chronicles X. Sawano was brought in to compose a 55-track original soundtrack for Xenoblade Chronicles X, Monolith Soft's second entry in the series following Xenoblade Chronicles on Wii. The first game in the series saw composers such as Manami Kiyota, Ace, Kenji Hiramatsu, Yoko Shimomura, and even Yasunori Mitsuda contribute to it. But X had a different vibe, and Tetsuya Takahashi specifically chose Hiroyuki Sawano for that reason. Takahashi even went as far as to go to tweet on the official Xenoblade JP account that he basically insisted that Sawano was the composer for Xenoblade Chronicles X, especially since he's been a huge fan of him for many years. As you might expect, that means that X as a soundtrack is so different from all other Xenoblade games to this point. The main team of composers from Xenoblade Chronicles, being Ace, Kenji Hiramatsu, and Manami Kiyota, returned for both Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And of course, the legendary Yasunori Mitsuda joined them to compose on both of those soundtracks this time instead of just composing the end vocal theme. These three soundtracks in the series are much closer in terms of genre and style than anything like Xenoblade Chronicles X. Xenoblade X has over 10 different vocal tracks on the OST, which is far more than Sawano generally does for one project. As I've said, this project in particular has so many different styles, just as we can expect from Sawano. He actually spoke on this specific soundtrack in an interview in 2015, saying the following when asked about all the different genres in this project. "I guess that's the result if you let me compose what I want. When I received the materials about Xenoblade X and watched a conceptual video, my first impression was that this would be a Western sci-fi epic. At the beginning, I simply wrote songs with an electric sci-fi feeling, but I thought that writing 90 pieces with this style would get boring." Tetsuya Takahashi heard the tracks I had composed so far and then said, "Feel free to use other styles if you think they fit." And that's why the soundtrack turned out this way. While Tetsuya Takahashi was notoriously very hands-on for the first Xenoblade Chronicles game, from everything we know, it seems like he mostly let Sawano have free reign for the most part for Xenoblade X. And while that might just sound like an easy way for Takahashi to say, "I respect you and your work, feel free to do what you please," I feel it is much deeper than that. Alongside the release of the original soundtrack for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Tetsuya Takahashi shared a message, and it's one that I feel illustrates just how vital Hiroyuki Sawano has been to the Xenoblade series as a whole. Let's rewind 15 years. At the time, in Japanese TV dramas, there was a popular trend of playing striking music at the closing of a chapter. Within that type of music, Sawano Hiroyuki's music was especially powerful, and I particularly liked his music in Iryu and Devil. I think it was around 2006 to 2008. I wanted to incorporate that kind of powerfulness into a video game, and when I ordered music for Xenoblade, I presented his music as a sample for the kind of direction I was looking for. Later, when Sawano and I got to work together for Xenoblade X, I told him that story, and he said I had no idea, and I suppose it all made sense. I remember him laughing and talking about that. This quote is in direct reference to Carrying the Weight of Life and Engage the Enemy from Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Xenoblade Chronicles, both of which were composed by Kenji Hiramatsu. This is something I think a lot of Xeno fans just aren't aware of, but Sawano's music was used as a sample for the beginning of the series. Takahashi wanted the music to follow that type of style, incorporating that powerfulness into a video game, as he said. I think it's so remarkable that Sawano, who first inspired Takahashi in the direction of the Xenoblade series, was able to actually contribute to it in Xenoblade Chronicles X. And while that soundtrack in particular definitely has mega fans and people who absolutely despise it, it is absolutely the most unique soundtrack in the series, and I love it just for that. Hiroyuki Sawano in the Xenoblade series isn't just a one-sided relationship though. Yes, he inspired the music behind the series in a way, and of course left a huge mark composing an entire soundtrack, but his work for this series actually paved the way for his future sound, as he said himself. Sawano has shared on his fan club blog that Xenoblade Chronicles X ended up forming the basis for his sound for all of his soundtrack works afterwards. He acknowledged the fact that yes, he's had much bigger soundtracks like Attack on Titan, but for him personally, Xenoblade Chronicles X was that first project he was able to pursue the international soundtrack sound he wanted to aim for. This soundtrack was done well before the actual game released, so if you listen to many of his works following 2013 to 2014, I think you can really hear that influence in the stuff that he learned along the way. This comment from him was in 2023, which is pretty recent in retrospect, and I think that speaks volumes for still just how important this soundtrack is to him today. And with it being such an important soundtrack to him personally, it should be incredibly exciting to hear that Hiroyuki Sawano is returning to compose new music for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. This news was made public last week, and oh my gosh, I was losing my mind. If you look at where Sawano was around 2012 to 2013 when he likely was brought on to the project versus now, it's almost unrecognizable. He was a vastly growing name at that time, but at this point he's one of the biggest composers in the anime industry. Basically anything that Aniplex's A1 Productions is animating, he's probably composing for it. His latest project is arguably the biggest anime airing right now, Solo Leveling Season 2, and I've been personally really impressed with all the new ideas he's incorporated into this soundtrack. Suffice to say, this is an unbelievably huge deal and endlessly exciting. Monolith Soft has confirmed that he will be joined by Misaki Umase to compose this new music for the definitive edition. As I mentioned earlier, Sawano pairing with another composer on a project is pretty typical stuff, so this shouldn't be a surprise. The new story content genuinely seems mind-blowing as I'm starting to see things I swear are Xenosaga references. And my gosh, just thinking about all the new music that Sawano might be composing for it has me literally counting every second to March 20th. We've actually already heard one new composition from Sawano for this release, being a new remix of Don't Worry, that theme that plays when you use your scale. I'm sure you know it because it always plays. In the game, you're going to be able to flip between the original version, this remixed version, and a remixed version without vocals. I personally really do enjoy the remixed version as I feel like it takes a lot of the stuff he's used from his recent soundtracks, putting a more acoustic feel into it with the guitar. If I had to guess, I'd say these new remixes were done a few years ago at least, as some of the different stylization here sounds more like the stuff from 2021 than now, but it's still great to hear Sawano return and use more recent scores as influence. It's a nice listen, and I'm really excited to see if there's going to be other remixes for songs maybe like Uncontrollable or more. And of course, give me that new music because my playlist is already opening up for new additions. Just thinking about Sawano returning to the world of Xenoblade after a decade of evolution has occurred with his style has me so excited. I'm hoping for some even more ridiculous track titles too. To be honest, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit shocked that Sawano is coming back for this project, but I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about just how much influence he had on Xenoblade and just how much this soundtrack means to him personally with his growth. To be honest, I gotta say what's on every hardcore Xeno fan's mind. It's definitely giving me some thought if we might see Yuki Kajiura return, but we'll talk about that one maybe tomorrow. To wrap things up, Hiroyuki Sawano is one of the best composers out there right now, constantly innovating and giving just unbelievable soundtrack after unbelievable soundtrack. He has had unquestionable influence on the Xenoblade Chronicles series, and his work on Xenoblade X is seriously great. I am so excited for his return, and I cannot wait to listen to all of the tracks 200 times at least once again. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Beyond The Conduit, and hey, do yourself a favor if you haven't really listened to any of Hiroyuki Sawano's projects before. Put them on repeat until March 20th, and probably after that too. We'll see you next time.